Hello and welcome. I am Matt Roddy, and this is the Greater Prescott podcast, where we talk about, you guessed it, all things Greater Prescott. Today, I want to thank Tim and Jesse from Arcosanti for being my guests. You guys, thank you very much for your time today.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Thanks for having us, Matt.
I named the podcast Greater Prescott Podcast very specifically because we have a very rich area. Within a couple hours of Prescott, you can get to Sedona, Arcosanti, Grand Canyon, down to Phoenix. I mean, we just have an interesting place to kind of a jump off point. And so I named it that so I could come to places like this and include things like Arcosanti because I think they're unique, diverse, special. And so we're going to get into all of those things, and I know you guys have a lot to say about all those things. So again, thank you very much for your time.
All right, let's do it.
So let's dive in. In order to set the context, I want people to get a sense of just a little bit about, like, for example, Jesse, where were you born and raised? What did you do when you were a kid? And kind of bring us to the point when you decided to come to Arcosanti, and then we'll go over to Tim and have you share the same thing, because I want people to kind of get a glimpse of what it was that inspired you to end up here and your passion for this sort of stuff. So just kick it off, Jesse.
Yeah. So normally during my interactions with anyone that stops by, I like to start off by saying I have a weird relationship with Arcosanti.
Okay.
So I'm originally from New York City, born and raised. And when I was around 13, I got a scholarship to go to a boarding school half an hour away from here, the Orm School.
Okay.
So during my high school career, we would drop in and do little bell workshops. That's how I originally got acquainted with the place.
Oh.
And then I happened to make a great friend in high school who was born and raised here. So through him, I'd come down on the weekends and stay for vacations because it was a lot cheaper than flying home.
Yep.
And slowly but surely, this became like a home adjacent. Made a lot of relationships, a lot of connections. And after a few years of college, studying business and communications over at Yavapai College, that same friend recommended to take a workshop.
Okay.
So I applied for a workshop. I ended up getting a scholarship for this 5-week workshop program that the Cosanti Foundation used to offer.
Gotcha.
And after my workshop, I decided to stay for a few months, and a few months turned into several years.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. That's short and skinny. We'll get back to some of that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Tim, what about you?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I was born in Joshua Tree, California, and my family moved to Arizona in the 90s. They moved to Prescott. And so Arizona's always been near and dear to my heart. And after I finished high school, I went out to Los Angeles for college. And once I finished college, I went and lived abroad for a while and then landed in New York afterwards for 5 years. And then I came back to Arizona to take care of my dad for a little while, and he was still living in Prescott. And when I'd been living in New York, I read about Arcosanti in the New York Times.
Okay.
And I thought it was interesting, and I'd never heard of it before. And I actually had to pull up a map and look at where it was on the map, and I was surprised to see how close it was to Prescott.
Exactly.
So I knew that I wanted to come and visit, and then I met a person who lived here, and they were organizing an event at the time called Convergence, which is a festival conference hybrid that celebrates the intersection of art, celebratory culture, regenerative sort of theories about how to organize communities and how to organize our planet. And so through Convergence, I basically came here and helped out for a couple of days, and then really enjoyed being here. So I started coming out more regularly, and then moved here full-time in February of 2017.
Okay.
And then, February of 2018. Okay. No, 17. 3 years.
3 years.
Sorry. Yeah. Time is a funny thing out here. And so, I ended up staying. I was a full-time volunteer for about 6 months, and then I was hired by the Cosanti Foundation to do tours. And then we had a leadership transition about 2 years ago, a little over now, and I was brought onto the executive team when that happened as the director of community engagement.
Okay. Mm-hmm. All right. Let's go back to your story. So you went from New York City to Orm for boarding school. How? I don't know much about boarding school. I don't know why people... Tell us about that.
Yeah, so my school in New York, my middle school, IS 195, kind of sounds like a prison.
Yeah.
Or like COVID-19's big bad brother, IS-195. Yeah.
That's what you really don't want.
Yeah. I don't want either of them, but yeah.
Well, it was a very interesting schooling experience.
Okay.
Regardless, while I was at school, my last year of school when I was in 8th grade, there was this program that happened where an outside party came in and they wanted to offer a scholarship to kids in lower income families.
Okay.
And so they set up like a competition in the school. They picked a few students based off of teacher recommendations, staff recommendations, as well as subpar to pretty better than average grades.
Yeah.
And over the course of several months, me and a couple of other students sort of just did different interviews. We had different sessions with different staff members from the Orm School who had come out to New York to sort of just see what we were like, see what sort of passions we had, what we wanted to do. And 2 months, maybe 1 month before school ended, they finally announced their decision for the competition.
Okay.
And I ended up placing second in this competition. So I wasn't particularly bummed at that point, because I thought to myself, well, I don't really know if I want to go out to Arizona. From what I understand, it's a barren wasteland.
It's
road runners,
cactus everywhere,
cacti, a lot of dust. But the person who placed first, she lived at home with her mom, and they were the only two that lived together. So she opted to stay in New York, which gave me the opportunity to pick up that scholarship.
All right.
And so after a good month or two of summer, just really bashing my head against the wall over whether or not I really wanted to come out to Arizona, I decided to take the leap and come out. After the first 3 days, my first 3 days during orientation, my mom actually came out with me to Arizona just to
makes sense.
Help me
help you settle in.
2 days into my orientation, when my mom was buying her plane ticket back home, I told her, buy me a flight back home, because I'm done with the dust. I'm done with the bugs. I'm not about this.
It's a little different.
It is. Thankfully, at that point, my headmaster at the time, a wonderful human being, she heard what was going on, and she sat me down, and she had a proposal for me. She said, Jesse, I know this is a little different for you, and you're probably already feeling homesick, even though your mom's still here. But how about we come to an agreement? If you can, stay for a month, just stay for a month. That's all she wanted me to do. And if you really don't like it, I'll buy your plane ticket back home. And I said, no problem. I can keep my grudge over the desert for a month. And then after a month, after several weeks of calling home every night and crying my eyes out just because I missed home and everything home related, the last week of that month stint, of that month agreement, I ended up actually making friends and making connections, and I decided to stay for a little longer.
Okay.
And then I just kept coming back to the school because of how much I appreciated the environment.
Yep. Interesting. Yeah. Okay. For you, you said you went to high school in Prescott? Prescott High School?
Yep.
What'd you do when you were in high school?
What did I do when I was in high school?
What kind of...
Yeah.
Were you a book reader, a football player?
Tim was a jock.
Yeah. No, I was not a jock. Actually, it's funny. I quit the football team after a week.
Okay.
I went through hell week with the football team, and there was this really, really sweet guy who was the captain at the time. And the last day of Hell Week, I was like, I don't think I want to do this. Yeah. And he sat me down, and he was like, Tim, you can do it. I believe in you. And I was like, yeah, I can do it. And then I walked into school on Monday, and I turned in my pads, and I was like, I'm not going to do this.
Not doing this.
No, I was a theater person.
Okay.
Yeah, I've been thinking about that a lot lately, and how it kind of relates to the time I've spent here. I went to school for theater eventually. That's what I went to college for.
In LA? Mm-hmm. Okay.
And, theater was my first encounter with community. My first, real-life encounter with community. And with the feeling of doing something that was collaborative and cooperative with people and building something. And so I've been doing a lot of reflection in the last couple of months about this place and sort of my time that I've spent here. And so part of that has been kind of tracing the history back of when I got interested in the ideas of community in the first place.
Yeah.
And so, I think that was maybe my first taste of that. Was it feels really good to be working together with a lot of people towards a common cause.
Yes.
And so I'm really grateful for that experience because it led here in a very strange and roundabout way.
Yep. No, one of the reasons I always try to draw out some of my guests' early stories is because some of these things start to come out. And
well, when you said, what did you do in high school? I was like, I don't know, besides cut sixth period and go to Grasshopper Point in Sedona, before Sedona was Sedona.
Yeah. And after the fact, people on the podcast go, oh man, I haven't thought about that in a while. Like just connecting the dots, I really enjoy. I've got a background in psychology. I just think the mind and the behavior is fascinating. So I'm always very intrigued by it, to say the least.
Yeah. I should say, I don't know, can you hear those sounds that we're hearing on the right now? I hear it through my headphones.
I think it's the...
No, it's our foundry. They're down working in the
okay.
Foundry. So.
Partly when we did that initial, and this is, I won't even cut this but our initial look at the camera where we were nice and quiet, I can just cut out kind of that background noise.
Okay.
And it'll be fine.
Cool.
Yep.
It's authentic though. At the same time.
It's real.
Yeah.
It's a mixed use space.
Because I saw a video of you that Vice did, or not just of you. It wasn't of you, Tim. Sorry. But anyways, very very much produced, and this isn't. So give me a little background. So you had met a friend at ORM that kind of got you involved here initially, just on a very light basis, so to speak, and then tell us a little bit about that.
In terms of what
were your early experiences of Arcosanti? Yeah.
So I remember when I first got to Arcosanti, I didn't really think much about the entire environment.
This was in high school.
School, yeah. So I landed. My friend was like, "My house is this way," and I was like, "Okay, this seems like a very interesting environment." At the same time, I was coming from a boarding school that is also out in the middle of nowhere. So I wasn't all too estranged at that point. I was kind of just most neighborhoods in Arizona must look like this.
Yeah, of course, right? We got to get you out, Jesse.
Little did I know. And so I just landed. I was given a general walk around of site. I couldn't really contextualize all of it. I didn't really know what was going on. At the same time, me and my friend were both in high school, so he wasn't a tour guide extraordinaire. He didn't necessarily himself understand all of the history of this site, and was able to completely convey all of that information. So initially I just thought it was a really cool a place that my friend lived. We would go on hikes, we'd see petroglyphs, I would get to use the pool, and I was this is, it set the tone for Arizona for me. And I was just remote desert locations happens to be the trend in Arizona.
Okay. Yeah. All right, so then let's fast forward. Let's start talking about which you've already shared a little bit about your initial, how you ended up here at Arcosanti, but talk specifically about what you did when you got started here. Actually, no, let's just start from a global view. Tell everyone what Arcosanti is, how long when it was created, I don't know what it stands for, its mission. Let's talk about some of those things, and then we can talk about things like what you guys each do here, how people live here, Foundry, and things like that.
Yeah, so Arcosanti is a prototype for an idea called arcology, which is basically a theory that this guy Pablo Soleri developed, starting in really 1955, 1956.
Okay.
Soleri came over from Italy as an immigrant and as a architect, and he had his doctorate actually at the time.
Wow.
And so when he encountered American cities for the first time, this was right after World War II, which he'd been through.
Yeah.
And so he had experienced the sort of horrific level of destruction that a mechanized, industrialized society could reap on itself. And so he was thinking a lot about cities and the way that humans organize ourselves. And when he got to New York, there's actually some really wonderful drawings we have in our archive where Solari sketched the New York City skyline before he came on a bus out to Arizona.
No kidding.
He came to study under Frank Lloyd Wright, actually.
Yep.
And he was looking at American cities, and he thought that there was a design flaw, basically, in the way that we were designing our cities. That Americans were moving in this direction where basically we were moving towards this kind of like consumerist model of building cities, this sprawl model of building cities, where our cities were getting really wide and basically dominating the landscape.
Yeah.
And he thought that that was antithetical to the way that a city should be designed. And the reason actually that human beings gathered together in the first place in communities, which was primarily for resilience and protection and communal experience.
Yeah.
And so Solari basically was looking at the American urban form and came up with arcology as a proposal for how we could actually reimagine our cities to be more collaborative and cooperative and also better for the environment. So Arcosanti represents the only prototype in the world of that model. In 1970, after about 15 years of working on these ideas, Solari basically got together a group of people, and they came out here and they started building this thing, and they didn't really know how far they would get on it. So Arcosanti today has been built by over 8,000 people, primarily volunteers, although we've had a full-time staff here for the last 20 or so years.
Right.
We run a variety of different programs on this site, from tours to events to educational partnerships. We've got guest rooms and Airbnbs. We rent the site to different groups who want to use it for photo shoots and things like that. And then on the flip side of that, I call that the 9 to 5, and that's what the Cosanti Foundation, who's the nonprofit that Jesse and I both work for, manage.
Yeah.
And then the 5 to 9 is basically the full-time residential body who lives here and sort of organizes themselves around what it's like to live full-time in a a prototype model.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Well said.
Mm-hmm.
What are you thinking, Jesse? What can you add to that?
Yeah, so Arcosanti, broken down, because it is a word that Solari came up with, right? Arcosanti is broken up into a few different parts. You have Arco, the first part, which is a shortened version of arcology, an integration of architecture and ecology, and then you have Cosanti, which is broken down into cosa, in Italian means thing, and anti, before. So herein you have this idea where not only are you trying to infuse your architecture with a certain amount of ecological mindfulness, but you also have this urban planning wherein you're trying to maximize the way that people build connections as opposed to trying to build on materialistic values. And so you do have a model for a community that tries to consistently bring people together. Some might even say that the way that Arcosanti is designed in its pedestrian-friendly, organic fashion in and of itself does an amazing job of literally pushing people together, which is, for I think most people who have found home in sense of community, really enthralling.
Oh, that's fascinating, especially as we experience. I mean, the U.S. is a very individualistic country. I mean, we're how far away from the next person can I get, in a sense? And so for you guys to talk about coming together, I think is a really fascinating conversation. And I think that I know I desire it. It's interesting when you start to reflect on things like this. You go, man, I want that. So that's a really interesting component of the arcology, the kind of the foundation upon which this was built.
Yeah, I think that the idea of America as an individualistic place. I think something that the COVID-19 pandemic is demonstrating is that individualism isn't a particularly resilient model, and there's a reason that people desire to live, in their, the way that the vast majority of my friends who I grew up in Prescott with have chosen to live, which is to say owning a house, you've got your front yard and your backyard and you've got your wall around it. And if you're very private, then you've got, hedgerows and things like that. Yeah. And, I think people choose to live that way because when you live in a communal-oriented model, even like New York City, which at the very least has a density model behind it, you're packing a lot of people into space, which was the idea here. It was literally the idea of taking these large, sprawling urban environments and imploding them on themselves in a much more dynamic, vibrant way than the way our cities are designed right now. And the reason people choose to live in a way where they're, sort of isolated is because they don't want anyone to tell them what to do with their life, right? And we're seeing actually the most extreme version of that we're seeing is this whole...
I'm guilty.
Yeah, well, and this, the politicized, mask-wearing thing. People just don't like being told what to do with their life.
Right. And
the thing you learn when you live in a communal model is that it's not about you, It's about everyone around you, and... how do you take care of those people so that they can take care of you? And there is a certain part of that is caring for yourself so you can care for your community.
Of course.
But when you have to orient your every single action you take in an environment towards how is this going to affect the people around me rather than how is it just going to affect me, I think it fundamentally changes the way that you think about things. And the thing with American cities that's interesting, and all of this is really, really new. And I think that's something...
Well said.
Yeah, we're not great at context and history as a species. We're just not good at taking the long view and looking at things within context. So the American city model is only 100 years old.
I was going to say.
It's very new. And it's an unproven model for organizing society. Now, we're not saying that our model is any better. We don't know for sure. We've got literally 15 acres and 80 people who live here. Yeah. But it is, I think, from the Cosanti Foundation's point of view, really important to be demonstrating that there might actually be other ways to organize a city besides the one that we've all not even formally agreed to, just tacitly agreed to by being born into it.
Yeah.
So Prescott's a good example of that, actually. When I was growing up in Prescott, there were 30,000 people living there. Yeah. And now I think
All right, and you're talking in the entire Prescott Valley?
No, not in the greater Prescott area.
Gotcha.
That was closer to 90 at the time.
Okay.
But, and now I think Prescott's population, I haven't checked recently, but I think it's close to
250.
It's a lot of people. And people move to a place like Prescott because they want to be close to nature, right? And so you buy your house and you get it up into the trees and you've got this really beautiful home. And then what happens is 10 years later, everyone else has made the same decision as you have, and all those trees behind your home are cleared, and the city's stretching 10 miles further, and your access to nature is almost totally lost. And so what I really liked about arcology as a model is that basically I believe we're going to have to learn to live more sustainably on this planet.
Absolutely.
And I don't think we're going to tackle it on the home-by-home basis. I think that you actually have to tackle these urban environments, and actually I would count Prescott as an urban environment these days. And so only by grappling with the larger question of how do we design are we going to be able to, I think, solve both the climate crisis that we're in and also the sort of crisis of connection that we're in.
Yeah.
With, I think loneliness is a really, it's an intense thing, and a lot of people,
Definitely.
I think, are feeling that, and it's been, only exacerbated by what we're going through right now as a country. So I will say, I don't think anyone at Arcosanti throughout the pandemic felt lonely, or has felt lonely.
Yeah, and I mean, that comes up a lot. When people stop by for tours, they're like, oh, how was everything during the pandemic? And honestly, 860 acres to walk around in, a community of 70 other people who were all quarantining in the same place to talk to. It's oh yeah, I wouldn't have an issue with walking out of my home.
Not a whole lot changed, I would imagine.
Well, what did change was we didn't have any tourists coming in. And that was nice for a little while. Then people, after a couple weeks, were like, all right, we're bored. When's everyone coming back?
Yeah. Okay. Very interesting about just bringing people together. I think that's really important. And I think we all, I don't know about all, but I know I really want it. So really, and I haven't thought about these things much. So I'm pondering as you guys talk about the model here and all the great things that I think come as a result of it.
Well, yeah, humans are we're very influenced by our environment, and I think that that's something that architects understand intuitively, or maybe not intuitively, but through training, is that people will be influenced by their environment. So Scolari wasn't doing anything different, but instead of saying, okay, I'm going to build a home that people feel good in, he was saying, I'm going to design a whole city that people would feel good in. And it's really important to note that, like, no one knew how you would build any of these things. He was what was called a paper architect, almost purely theoretical. And this is a demonstration site so that people could just get like a little taste of what he might be talking about. But, basically the whole concept is passive anyway, because it's like, how do you passively influence people by virtue of being in a built environment that's meant for people rather than for, what do you think we design environments for? Or what do we design cities for in America? What is the number one thing?
Well, to live in.
No.
Convenience. Space.
We design them for cars.
Okay.
Yeah, over 60% of the American city, the landscape itself is dedicated to automobiles, between roadways and parking lots and parking garages. And so the city, from our point of view, the idea, the core element of why you designed a city in the first place in the U.S. was flawed from the beginning, because instead of looking at it from a people-centric point of view, people looked at it from automobile-centric point of view. And automobiles are, an intensely isolating experience.
Very much so.
I think if you've ever been caught in traffic, everyone knows the feeling of being frustrated with the person in front of you, and they're not even a car anymore, or they're not a person anymore. They're an obstacle.
Yeah.
And so, I think that one of the things that I liked about this model was that basically we view that as an inherently inhuman way to look at the people who live around you each and every day, to look at them as obstacles and inconveniences. They're people in your community. They could be that could be your grandma sitting in front of you in that car.
Totally.
So it's an interesting, I don't know, it's a funny place to live.
No, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, not to dissuade anyone from having their own home or their own space, because that's not necessarily what any of these concepts are about, as much as it is at what point do you try and have people think alternatively.
Well said.
And what would a neighborhood look like if instead of 6 people having their own homes and their own separate backyards, you had 6 people having their own homes in maybe a collective backyard or a large park to bring more community space.
Yeah.
No, I think I really like how you guys have framed it from a sense of it's not wrong necessarily to have the house, but let's take a step back. When all these things were being designed, they were being designed a certain way, and that has revealed some negative consequences, so to speak. So what are some ways that we can improve on things?
Yeah, and I don't think anyone does. The idea is, it's funny because the longer I live here, the less radical the ideas sound to me.
Of course.
They sounded really radical when I first got here. It's a radical concept.
It's completely foreign to what 90+% of us Americans have experienced. And that's just normal for us.
Yeah,
it's our design.
It's what we're.
Which is one thing that fascinated me about Arcosanti, which is I want to learn more.
Yeah.
Ultimately.
Are you familiar with the 4 Agreements by Don Miguel Ruiz?
I know, I've heard of it.
Okay. It's a book about the idea that basically we're born into a world of agreements we never made. And so so Americans are born in, we're just born into a lifestyle, and if you don't encounter something like Arcosanti or something that makes you think about something a little differently, odds are you're probably just going to keep doing whatever that lifestyle is that was laid out for you without questioning it. So I think that's what happened with me here. I grew up in a small town that was very poor, and I moved to cities and lived in areas that were poor and areas that were a little more well off. moved to Japan. I saw a country that organized itself actually on almost the exact opposite principles of individualism. Japan goes to the
very
extreme other
Yep.
part of that equation. Yeah, it's a very collective mentality over there. And then I got to New York, and New York was just awesome. I was like, this place is so much fun. It's like urban, and you've got diversity, and I can be sitting on a train, and people are talking in languages I don't understand. And so people always say, well, it must have been really weird to make the leap from New York to Arcosanti. And it actually really wasn't, because what I was feeling in New York was like, this is amazing, but also something about this isn't working either. Like you see a lot of poverty, you see a lot of infrastructure decline and things like that. And so what was really cool about Arco was when I landed here, I felt like I was in the first place I'd ever encountered that was proposing something that explained why if you live in Prescott, you feel isolated. If you live in New York, you can still feel isolated.
Right.
You can still find things to critique about each of those things. And so here, this was like this really wonderful combination of all my interests. It was like, oh, you can have community, and you can live in a city, and cool things are happening.
Yeah.
And also, you get to walk out into the middle of this beautiful, dusty cactus rhododendron-filled Arizona landscape anytime you want.
Yeah.
So it was very compelling.
Yeah.
I fell in love hard with this site.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, and quite often, people ask, do you miss home? Like, do you miss dense urban living? And it can be easy to miss a city of 8.5 million when there's always something to do. There's always something going on. There's always a whole different array of food and diversity and people, and all at the same time. It doesn't necessarily feel like too much of a breakaway from what you have in New York, this dense, urban, pedestrian-friendly environment, because that's what it is. And whenever I go back home, I think that something that I still feel amiss is even more so trying to make it a pedestrian-friendly environment, because you do still have plenty of space in New York dedicated for private vehicles. You do still have plenty of space for just cars, and if you go to downtown, the traffic isn't fun. You don't want to drive your own private vehicle.
No one wants to drive in New York at 5 p.m.
Yeah,
on a Friday.
It's not an enjoyable experience.
Right.
It really takes away from the human aspect, from being able to connect with that whole spectrum of diverse, intelligent, and profoundly thinking, in a lot of instances, human beings that could just be sitting in one other boxcar away from you. And it's a shame. There's a part of New York that in the past a few years they had redesigned, and a few years ago they started off by doing this little project. They set up a few traffic cones in one of the streets around Times Square to see if they could block off traffic and see how well people would redirect themselves. And people redirected themselves almost immediately. You have people still trying to get from point A to point B, no problem. But they found out by doing this a few more times that they could effectively just block off these roads permanently and make them into pedestrian-friendly environments. So you could set up, just put down a stone walkway and have people set up tables and create a more lively environment for people to walk in, for people to engage in, and for people to actually be together. And seeing that within a dense urban environment,
maybe the most, one of the most in the world.
That's usually one of my go-to examples for what an arcology would look like if you were to also plug in more ecology.
Gotcha.
Yeah, it gets to that. It gets to that passive idea, which is that, again, humans we're very influenceable. We're very influenceable by what's going on around us. We like to think that we're thinking for ourselves all the time, but the reality is that's what I find funny about the model we have is we're so defensive of it, but we didn't design it.
Of course not.
People are oh, I want my car and I want my thing, and you're but you didn't design this. Someone else designed it to make money off of the fact that you're using
Primarily,
it.
yeah.
You know, like, and I wouldn't care if someone had, you know, if they just were like, okay, I know all the options and this is the option I want. But one of the things I think about a lot is Vision Zero in Norway.
Okay.
Are you familiar with this?
No.
And they actually tried it in New York, and it's been, you know, it's hard to break through that American mentality. It's been relatively successful there. But Norway, basically, I mean, what do we have in American traffic deaths every year? It's like 80 to 100,000, maybe more.
I don't know.
Way
I
too
think
many.
a high
A lot of-
percentage is
a
probably,
lot of traffic deaths.
I-17.
Yeah. Yeah, so there, you know, there's a lot of like, in theory, preventable traffic deaths in this country. Norway has taken their traffic deaths. They decided like a decade ago, we just don't want to do this anymore. We don't want people dying in car accidents. And so they've literally taken them down to zero. And they did it, and that sounds so crazy to us as Americans, right? You're like, how do you do that? Well, it's actually really easy. You put planters in the middle of all the roads so that people can't make left turns, because left turns are really dangerous. Okay. Instead of traffic lights, you do roundabouts, because when you have a roundabout, people are more conscious as they're pulling up to them. Like, people might complain about the roundabouts in Prescott, but you never see anyone pulling up to a roundabout texting up there, right? They're putting that phone down because they're like, oh, this thing's a pain in the ass. Well, yeah, it's a pain in the ass.
But hey, I'm coming up to a red light.
Like,
I'm just going to pull my phone out.
It's supposed to be a pain in the ass because you're driving a 3,000-pound death machine right now. And it's flammable. Like, yeah, it's supposed to be a pain in the ass.
Okay.
And the only thing that can happen in a roundabout with an accident is you sideswipe someone. Yeah. And then the final thing they did was they took all speed limits to 45 miles an hour.
Okay.
And that's the fastest you can drive in Norway.
Man.
And they eliminated traffic deaths. And like, it's so,
awesome.
You know, but they didn't do it by trying to like train everyone to be like smarter drivers. They didn't do it by trying to like make the safest cars ever.
Correct.
They just did it by looking at the situations that were leading to deaths, and they're like, okay, well, let's redesign our streets so that that doesn't happen.
Yeah.
And let's redesign our rules of the road so that doesn't happen. But again, that's a collective mentality.
Definitely.
You have to be able to, as a culture, come together around an idea and look at it and say, yeah, like, we don't want hundreds of thousands of people dying in cars anymore. Like, that totally sucks.
Yep.
So how do we fix that? Well, we have to give up a couple of things.
Yes.
But things that, like, we didn't even design in the first place, you know? Why do speed limits get increased in this country? They get increased because people drive fast.
Gotcha. So
Every like 10 years,
bump 'em up.
they go out there, they start clocking, and they notice people are driving faster, and then they just like, you know, that's how we got all the speed limits we have right now. Because people were just like, instead of like holding ourselves accountable, we're like always trying to push that limit, you know. So I think it's really interesting the way. That's kind of the lesson here in many ways, is you realize just how powerless you almost are to the way that something is designed for you, or something's built for you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's one reason I love this format, is because things like this, you just can't get it out on a website. You know, it's really hard to kind of just flesh out some of these things that oftentimes take years to kind of develop in people's minds. Obviously, like Solare, it was years and years and years in the process, and then here you guys are kind of continuing that, and just taking it to a deeper level than, well, yeah, this is arcology, but it gets even deeper than that. So I love how you guys have spoke to it.
Yeah. Well, that's also one of the other, you know, one of the things that I always find interesting about our culture is like this desire to label something in order to try to immediately be able to understand it. You know, something that comes up often here is people are always like, well, are you guys hippies? And I'm like, I don't know, what's a hippie? You know, I think that that's something that, and you see it actually displayed in our political landscape right now, right? You're a liberal or you're a conservative, or you're a Democrat or you're a Republican.
Right.
You're a, you know, mask wearer, you're not a mask wearer. And what it does for us is it allows us to immediately put that person in a category without doing any of the hard work necessary to actually understand who they are and how they got to where they are and where your common ground might be.
Yep.
And so, that's one of those really funny questions we get out here where it's like, are you hippies? I'm like, well, I don't know. Like, hippie was just kind of a word that was like, you know, sort of thrown at a group of people in, you know, the 60s and 70s who were living alternative lifestyles. But was that even the right word then? Somehow I doubt it.
Right.
You know? And what's kind of fun about what we're seeing here at the moment, at least, is I would say when I started giving tours here 3 years ago now, we were kind of a curiosity for a lot of people.
Well, yeah.
You get like 95% of your tour would just be like, oh, let's go check out the weird thing in the desert.
Mm-hmm.
And these days, there are a lot of people on our tours who are coming through who are just like hungry and curious and like, what are you guys talking about here and how can I make this happen in my life?
Yep.
You know? And I think that's a really good sign. I think that it's basically that because of the isolation of the pandemic, it's, you know, moved forward a lot of people's desire to see if there's a better way to live than just like sitting in your air-conditioned, you know, cardboard box that you bought for X amount of dollars and doom scrolling on your phone. Mm-hmm. And that's not to say that we don't like doom scroll on our phone out here. We have all the same issues that like any other, you know, human endeavor would have, which is to say human nature. Yes. Constantly getting in our own way.
Definitely.
But at the end of the day, what I always think of as a proof that this is working is that even after a full day of like living and working side by side with people who live at Arcosanti, I still want to go hang out with them at the end of the day and, you know, have a beer and talk about our days and, you know, so
and live life.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So it's a really good sign.
That's awesome.
I'm not sick of Jesse yet.
Yeah, you know. And I mean, it's been a really interesting and entertaining experience overall, because like it's hard to categorize Arcosanti or the people who live at Arcosanti in any one category, and as you know, Tim just went on to talk about, it is really easy, especially in a very charged environment that we're in, to want to put people in a box.
Yes.
And I think that when you do give your environment a more walkability aspect, more pedestrian-friendly environment where they don't have to drive in their a small box from point A to point B, it gives people more time to drop in and connect. It's much easier to take, you know, the half hour that you were going to drive somewhere to just sit down with someone, talk to them about how their day was going. You know, if they have anything they need to get off their chest, it's like, all right, you know, we can do it. We have time. We've made time because of the environment that we're in, and that's special. That's something
really
that, like,
special.
You can't really. It's a luxury that not everyone's afforded, and because not everyone's afforded that luxury, you do have so many instances where people like go through stints of depression and isolation, where they feel like they can't talk to anyone because their environment has dictated a different culture, where they're not put into an environment where they have enough time, where they feel like they have enough time to talk to someone when they need to.
Yeah, it's really hard to not get to know someone who lives in a place that's this involved all the time. You know, one of the things I used to say when I first moved here was like, within 3 weeks, you know the best and the worst of a person. Yeah. And that's actually a really nice feeling, because you can work side by side with someone in some jobs. And
for a long time.
Yeah, and you won't know the first thing about them. But here, you get off work and you're also, you know, living very close to them. You know their partners or their closest contacts. Yeah, you get to know each other very well. The joke that I used to make about all this was like, the most difficult thing about a walkable environment is like, you don't like, at what point do you stop saying hello to each other during the day? Is it when you passed each other for like the 8th time or the 10th time? Like, oh, hey, Jesse. Oh, hi, Tim. Oh, hey, Jesse. Oh, hi, Tim.
Is there a number?
Yeah, I don't know. Is there a number?
I mean, you know, in the 3 years that I've been living here, consistently I try to make an effort to still say hi to everyone.
Awesome. That's true.
Just because, like, if like you're not taking a moment to acknowledge someone when obviously you're in a privileged environment to have those few moments to just acknowledge their existence, I think you're doing not only yourself a disjustice, but also like the community you're in. Because those are other people, and whether we like to admit it or not, like, everyone needs validation of existence. Everyone could use to be seen, even if it is just for like a few seconds of someone saying hi while they're passing by.
It's amazing what a smile will do for me. Like, it's just so simple. Oh my gosh, like, thanks for smiling. And then you actually say hello, like, how's your day? It gets even better.
Yeah.
It's so simple. The word isolation keeps coming to my mind, and just how dangerous that can be, and how you guys are the opposite of that. I mean, you guys practically live together, which actually speak to...
We don't practically live together. We literally live together.
So speak to... I didn't know there were residents here, so speak to that component. How does that process work? How many of you are there? What's your day-to-day like? Just, tell the people. Wait, real quick. Are you a resident? Okay, and you are too?
Yes.
Okay. I wasn't sure if you were... Perfect.
Yeah. I guess currently we have about 75 residents.
Okay.
Give or take. Since I've been here, I've seen that number go anywhere from 55 to 80.
Yeah.
And that's usually dependent on workshop participant sizes, interns, volunteers, and any seasonal characters that function kind of like snowbirds. Right? Yeah.
One in particular. Dr. Starks.
Yeah. As far as like an onboarding process goes, right? Because like, how does any resident become a resident? It used to be different, and for a long time, there was effectively like one way to become a resident. You would take a 5-week workshop, which the Cosanti Foundation used to offer. The workshop basically incorporated 1 week of like at least 1 week of like hands-on construction work, design work, 1 week of like arcology theory, delving into a lot of arcology material, just getting a much better understanding of the place, why it's here, why we're doing what we're doing, and how you might even be able to apply these ideas elsewhere. Gotcha. And then the rest of those 3 weeks, you would effectively, if you didn't have like a particular department, because the site is owned and operated by a nonprofit, so there are several departments. If there wasn't a particular department you had any interest in, you would effectively just do construction or landscaping work.
Okay.
After that workshop, if you wanted to stay, you would hand in this letter of intent to the community council, and the community council is a group of semi-annually elected residents. And that letter would basically just say what you wanted to do while you're here, what you expected to learn, what department you were planning to work for. It would have that department manager's signature, and where you were planning on living. Depending on your track record, which at that point was your workshop, you would either be allowed to stay or you'd be voted off the island.
Okay. All right.
Now it's a little different because the Cosanti Foundation doesn't have that 5-week workshop anymore. Gotcha. And so if someone becomes an employee of the Cosanti Foundation, the non-for-profit Cosanti Originals, which is the wholly owned subsidiary entity that manufactures and sells spells primarily, you become a micro enterprise owner, so you run your own small business on site, usually more than likely with ties to the Cosanti Foundation, or you're a volunteer / intern of any one of those groups. If you want to stay, then you can pitch in effectively like a proposal to live on site, and you'll be vetted. Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah, it's interesting because it's a community, but it's also a business. You have to have like sort of, there's like 2 fail-safes in place. You know, one is that you have to be sort of vetted by the business entity. Ooh, what's that?
Probably like too close to the microphone.
Yeah, so you have to be sort of vetted by the business entity here. And then also vetted by the community in a way, by the resident body who lives and works here, because
you're moving in with them, and you, in a sense, have to pay your way a little bit.
Yeah, and a lot of times, literally, like we have a variety of different housing options here.
Okay.
And so for volunteers and people who are here for short-term stays, we have dormitories, and dorms have 5 beds. They've got 2 rooms, shared living room, access to a group kitchen, things like that. And then actually there's 3 different types of housing on the site. So some of the housing is sort of like moved into family units. When someone has a family, we say, okay, well, you know, they can live in this space together. And we do that discretionarily. And then we have sort of like studio style apartments where people live in roughly like 400 to 500 square feet with a bathroom and a kitchen. And then we have group housing where basically people live in think about like a large roommate style experience in a city. Like
Okay.
you've got usually 4 to 5 bedrooms with 2 bathrooms and a kitchen. And so, yeah, and then actually beyond that, a full half of the existing housing, or like could be potential housing right now, is programmatic oriented. So
Okay.
Airbnbs, guest rooms, things that generate revenue and that also allow people to have access to come here and, you know, live and work as a, you know, volunteer and intern.
Wow. You guys have a lot.
Yeah,
That's
the property is 4,000 acres.
okay.
865 that we own, and then 3,000 that we lease from the Bureau of Land Management
All
and
right.
Steward as a nature reserve.
Yep.
The built environment's about 15 acres.
Okay. Wow.
Yeah,
It's huge.
Yeah, we've got a cafe, a gallery that sells our bells, a bronze foundry, a ceramics factory. We've got a full amphitheater. We've got, it's pretty extensive. It's actually really amazing when you think about how much we operate out here with how little we have. You know, it's really quite astounding. Yeah, really, the Cosanti Foundation itself, the nonprofit, I think it's up to like 24 staff members right now, and only like 18 of us actually live here. So there's people who live off-site now who work in our marketing department and some of our executive team members. And then actually the majority of people who live here work for the bell business.
Okay.
Which is
speak to that.
Yeah. Well, so any place or any project like this needs a revenue source. And so the earliest source of money that they were able to establish was basically manufacturing bronze and ceramic bells.
Okay.
And then the way it's organized right now, the Cosanti Foundation owns the intellectual property of the bells.
Okay.
And basically gives that to the bell business that we also own for a 20% design fee. They license it to them. And so that means that our own bell business sends back 20% of its revenues to the foundation, which is a big part of the reason why this place is still here.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, there have been many, many years where this place has kind of survived. That's actually an interesting part of the history of Arcosanti. You know, like basically this place has had many, I would call it like renaissance over the years, like iterations, and lots of, I think it's sometimes like dictated by what's going on in the world outside. You know, how interested are people in a concept like this? What is the level of expertise that people are going to bring into here? And I think we're in one of those periods right now where there's a lot of people interested in this. We're getting a lot of like really high quality, you know, intelligent, hardworking folks who want to come here and make this work.
That's great.
But then in a period of time where people are less interested in these types of models, then, you know, they're off spending their time elsewhere and doing other things. And so, the bell business in the periods of time where things maybe people haven't been so interested in Arcosanti, you know, often people are like, oh, well, I just discovered Arcosanti. But Arcosanti's been discovered, you know, half a dozen times over 50 years. But cultural interest in places like this kind of changes and shifts
ebbs
over
and
time.
flows.
Yeah. So we're really grateful because that bell business has been a kind
staple.
Of kind of the saving grace, and it's the thing that we're probably most well known for.
What is it? What is so special or unique or notable about the bell business besides it providing some income for the business and the foundation?
Ceramic bells effectively helped influence the way that we design structures. And so we make a lot of ceramic bells using a silt cast method. Silt, S-I-L-T, like really fine material that you can find off of most river deposits. And so it's definitely an abundant resource. You don't want to take too much of it from like a riverbed though, because it is like very, it does help carry a lot of nutrients down the river. Okay. Regardless, very early on, we started making bells, ceramic bells using a silt cast method or an earth cast method. So you would effectively create this empty cavity in this earth form. So you just like press a plaster mold into this earth bed. You'd create this void space. You take milkshake-like clay, which is known as slip, pour it into that empty cavity, and after a short while, the earth will just wick away moisture from the slip, and that creates this clay membrane along the inside of that cavity, at which point you suck out the extra slip from the middle, and you're left with this shell. which you can turn into a bell. So you'll notice around site we have a lot of rough textured bells.
Yeah, I saw some hanging when I walked down.
So those were made using a silt cast method.
Okay.
And earlier on in the project, you did have bells predating our design. So we were making, before the Cosanti Foundation was formed, you did have ceramic bells being made before structures were actually being made. And at some point or another, after so many bell iterations, you did have Solari think to himself, well, if I'm having such a successful time making bells using earth, can I use earth to create interesting structure design?
Yes.
And then you have earth casting on a larger scale than you have from like 1956 to like 1971, all of this experimental architecture going on at Cosanti, where people would come in to do workshops and get to do this experimental earth cast structure workshop. And they would get to literally pile up these large mounds of dirt, maybe put down a layer of silt on top of that, more raw earth, carve designs out of the silt, put concrete pigmentation on top of the silt, pour concrete over that, and then excavate the dirt, so you're left with this earthen cast structure. And so as far as like why bells are so important to us, why they're still around, because bells are a part of who we are. Bells helped initially fund the project. They helped get our revenue stream going, and they helped influence heavily the way we've designed all of our structures for over 50 years.
That's so neat.
Jesse mentioned Cosanti. That's our location in Paradise Valley. So did you know that exists?
Now that you're saying, I used to live in Scottsdale. That's where I lived before I moved up to Prescott. And it now rings a bell. I have never been.
You did not just say that. he won't even have got it. It rings a bell. Cosanti was Cosanti was the first location. That was Paulo Solari's working studio in Paradise Valley. When Phoenix actually, that was a city of 80,000 people in 1954, I think, when he first moved to Cosanti. So Solari basically, as Jesse was indicating there, no one was paying him to build whole cities. So he had to find a way to fund his architectural experiments.
Endeavors.
And so the way that he found was people were really into these silk cast bells that he was making.
Okay.
And then eventually they went on and did the bronze bells. So one of the things that I say is that the bronze is our lifeblood, but the ceramic is our soul. Because the ceramic,
makes sense.
That was the process by which a lot of these ideas, Jeff Stein, who's a former board member of ours, likes to say one thing leads to another in architecture. And so if you trace back the lineage, it can all be sort of traced back to basically Solari digging these holes in the dirt, filling them with clay, and removing these earthen bells. So the difference between the two is that the ceramic is really time intensive. They have to be individually crafted in the earth. You have to make the earthen molds. You have to actually pull them out and carve them by hand. So it can take anywhere from 20 to 45 minutes to carve a bell. And so start to finish, the process of making a ceramic bell is actually pretty long. And it takes about a month to do maybe 400 of them. In the bronze foundry, we pour between 300 and 500 pounds of bronze per day. So we have 2 foundries, and so each one is pouring 200 to 300 pounds. And so we're able to produce bronze at a much more rapid pace.
Makes sense.
It's very labor intensive though. It's hot work, and during the summer, it's 105 out here, and they're working out there every day.
Who buys these things?
Everyone.
I mean, I know you guys have visitors that come through here, but I assume more people abroad.
It's a really nice gift. I mean, they're just great.
That's what I'm thinking.
It's it's high quality. It's handcrafted.
It's really unique.
It'll last for thousands of years.
Easy.
Not to mention, it's what would you rather buy your mom? A DVD off of Amazon, or a handcrafted bronze bell that she's going to have for the rest of her life. So people like to buy them for wedding gifts, and they do them for home renovation projects, or realtors actually buy them a lot to give away as gifts when they close homes.
That makes sense.
And then we've got people who are hardcore collectors
Cool.
Yeah, I've met people who
That's
are like,
really cool.
Like, oh, I've got 35 of your bells. And I'm like, man, your neighbors must really dislike you like, during a windstorm. Or really like you. They sound beautiful, too.
Gotcha.
It's fun here, you know? It's like you're always kind of surrounded by the sound of the bells.
Mm-hmm.
And it almost kind of fades into the background. It's like the soundtrack of life at Arcosanti is the sound of bells all the time. And so every once in a while, when you bring yourself into the present moment, you're just sitting there, you can, it's like, oh, there they are.
Yeah,
it's really kind of
what
cool.
a unique kind of lineage, I guess, coming from those bells to what we're sitting in right now.
Yeah, I heard someone say recently that if art is the way we decorate space, then sound is the way we decorate time. And so, that's kind of maybe what the bells do for people. It like just kind of, it centers you in a moment in time.
Definitely.
And I've given one to my mom, so I know she hears that. I've given them to friends. Like, it's kind of like this like acoustic connection between the site and anyone who's ever been here.
Amazing.
Who feels a connection to it in some way.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think like just like speaking to like them in the form of gifts, not to like do a plug, but like I remember.
Hey, we can plug on this channel. You
Buy
gotta keep
our
the doors open.
Buy our bells. No, I remember like last year, I ended up sending a bell to my mom for her birthday.
Great.
And I didn't realize like how impactful it was until like I went back home. And I like saw the bell like hanging up in the balcony, in Bronx, New York, and she was like, "Yeah, every time it rings, I think of you."
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, "Wow, like that's soulful." I mean,
it really is.
That is like such a strong connection from such a seemingly a simple gift, but like a well thought out gift, a well crafted gift. I didn't like send my mom a bell because I was like, oh yeah, every time this rings, she's gonna think of me. It was like I want her to share in with what I do, even if it is just a small fraction. And like that has made like all the difference in our relationship. Every time I go back home, I'm like, yeah,
so
Mom,
neat.
every time I hear the bells here ringing, I think of you too. Yeah, it's just that make your ears a little mushy.
No, that's great.
Yeah.
We've covered a lot of ground. Thank you very much. I would like you guys to each give a parting word as to how to draw people in here. Maybe it's simply come check us out because I think this and that is really neat about us. Or if you've ever thought about, kind of just give people a parting word as to why to come, why to check it out, why to potentially get interested in it.
I'll let Tim go first, just because in my brain I'm trying to curate a very thoughtful message as to not be abrasive to individuals who stop by, feeling maybe like they have a right to check out the environment or this space. But I think, like, actually, I think be mindful. This is a community, but at the same time, like, come visit. Just because this is a cool, unique, and architecturally appealing space doesn't necessarily mean that you have to see all of it when you're here. And if you do really want to see it, all of it, or the majority of it while you're here, then like check out our website. Check out in advance, sign up for a tour, maybe book a room for a stay, a few months off, and just like plan your trip. Like make it a trip. Make it a.
That is a great idea.
Yeah.
You can stay here.
Make it an experience, and we'll help out with that.
I love it.
Yeah, it's an experiential space. It's meant to be experienced. People, you can't really get, just coming and taking a tour is amazing, but I think there's something to like falling asleep and waking up here.
I think I just added that to my bucket list.
Well, you could. You could do it tonight.
I bet I could.
We have guest rooms.
Yeah,
So you could
that's
just
really
book.
cool. What a really neat way to experience it.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I would say to people, this place is a gateway. It's like a gateway experience for if you're looking for something to kind of shake yourself out of, a routine, or if you're feeling like, whatever the, whatever life choices you've made, whatever, your job, your family, your home, like if you're feeling like you're, like that's not necessarily enough for you, then that's actually probably not an all that uncommon feeling, and that there are ways to dramatically shift the course of your life and your life choices that might help sort of resolve some of those, I think, feelings within people by finding new avenues for connecting with place and people and community. I think of Arcosanti as a place with a capital P. And I think that places with capital P's are getting more and more rare these days in like a highly commodified and commercialized world. And it's really special to be able to encounter a place with a capital P, and then to realize that there's a lot more places just like us. And I don't mean arcologies, but I mean places where people are choosing to do something a little bit different.
Okay.
And by doing something different are trying to reorient what the human experience is for themselves and the people that they love. Yeah. I've met so many people who've come through this place who do it in a way that's respectful and, boundary driven. Because that's the issue we have a lot, is people just like drive up and are like, well, I'm just coming in.
It's a free for all.
And you're like, no, like this is also a home. Yeah. So like, take a tour, stay overnight, meet people, and have a conversation. Yeah. But I've met so many people over the last, 3 years being here, who've come here, had a really amazing experience, and then left here and were like, called us up a year and a half later and were like, I left Arcosanti and my family and I realized that like the single family home thing wasn't really cutting it for us. So we went and we found a group of friends to live with.
Right.
Or we bought land and we're working on doing a big permacultural project. Or, we decided we want to get in a van and like go on the road for a little while and try to see what else might be out there.
Yes.
So this is not the answer. Like Arcosanti is not the answer
Gateway's a great
for
word.
anything, but it is a really good starting place for people who want to like, maybe shake it up a little bit. We got one life, it's one life to live, so you might as well make it an interesting one.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's this, I know we're cutting it soon, but there's this really great book that just talks about how your built environment subconsciously affects the way you think. Or affects your subconscious on a regular basis, and that's something that people don't regularly think of. Tim mentioned that earlier. Like, it's not all too often that, unless you have someone who has a background in like architecture, design, or they've been through an experience that has helped them really think about just what their environment that they're consistently putting themselves does to their brain. They won't want to change because they don't think there's anything to change. Not just this environment, but there are plenty of environments that help inspire alternative thinking and help you break away from the mold of your day-to-day, of the whatever systems were put in place well before you even knew they were established. And so get out and go see different things.
Yeah, it's like experience is like a jungle gym for learning to think differently. It's like putting your brain onto a jungle gym for a little while. And
could not agree more.
Well, it's like that feeling you have when you suddenly realize how to solve a problem that has been like, like a problem for a long time. You're like, oh, someone says something or you read something or you encounter, and so it's like, oh, why didn't I think of that before? And you can't think of it if you're gonna, if you're not going to put yourself into spaces and like alternative or different, like thinking differently, and that's the only way that our species has ever advanced itself in the first place, is by, one of us thinking about something a little bit differently and then acting on that thought. And sometimes it was a dramatic failure, right? Sometimes
probably,
you're like...
Probably most of the time it
was.
Yeah,
most of the time you're like strapping up like a deer skin, I don't know, a deer skin like pair of wings to try to jump off a cliff, and it doesn't work. but every once in a while you get the Wright brothers, and you're just, you know,
Boom.
and so I would say for anyone who wants to find a way to maybe look at their world a little differently, this is a great place to start.
Yes. You guys have been an absolute treat. I really appreciate you sharing from your heart about your experiences and about why it is you love this place. And I think, like what you said, be mindful. This place is somewhat of a gate. What was the word you used? Gateway. I'm really big on perspective in life. Like, get out of the house, go travel, go do new things, go do different things. Just go experience stuff, because it does force your mind to go through that jungle gym and to really start to maybe hone in on what it is that you do want. Or I like perspective. So I appreciate you guys sharing yours and how Arcosanti offers that. And so thank you very much. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, and thank you for having us.
Yeah,
Awesome.
it was really enjoyable. Thank you.
It's on my bucket list. I'm bringing the wife. We're staying here.
It's on your bucket. Just do it. I mean, it could be on your bucket list. So, like, you could bring the wife this weekend.
I could.
You could just do that.
I've got 4 kids.
Just bring the kids.
That's true.
Yeah,
My kids would
reach out to
love.
Tim.
I
You
would
guys, Tim,
love
just
to have my
contact me,
kids
but-
experience this place.
Yeah,
Like,
kids love it.
out.
Kids understand inherently how to interact with
Exactly.
it, you know.
Any parting words? I mean, you guys gave some good ones. Anything? I'll put up all the information so people can, get the website and things like that.
Yeah, people can check out our website at arcosanti.org, tour times and all the things, ways to stay overnight. We are a nonprofit, so we accept donations to the Cosanti Foundation, which helps us continue to steward this property and run the programs that we do for education. So that's under the support tab.
Cool.
And I would just say come and experience it.
Yes.
See
Please.
Jesse's handsome face.
Yeah, that smile, man, that smile. Guys, thanks again for your time. I hope that more people will just be intrigued by what you do here and want to come and check it out, and that it would be, in fact, that gateway that they can start something new.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, guys, I really appreciate your time today.
Likewise.
Yeah, thank you, Matt.
Let's close it out. Have a great
Do it.
day.
Yeah.